In this presentation, I want to talk to you about getting involved in open source development and how you can contribute fixes to your favorite software. For this presentation, I'll be showing you how to contribute to DNN, but the concepts are fairly universal to just about any open source project. So, you are ready to get started. Where do you begin? What are the steps involved? Like any endeavor in life, it is best to crawl before you walk. Start with something easy. Most people get started in open source by scratching their own itch. Find a simple bug that affects you and see if you can fix it. Every open source project is different. Many of them will include instructions on how to make contributions. Often, this will include filling out a contributor license agreement. In addition, you will want to find out which branch is used for development and whether the project requires valid unit tests with bug fixes or feature contributions. Projects want your help. Do everything you can to help them understand the problem you are trying to solve. Make sure you follow the contributor guidelines and be responsive to any comments you receive. Finally, keep your early contributions small so the project is not taking a big risk by including your fix. Once the team gets to know you and your skill, they'll be more likely to accept larger contributions. Regardless of the project, there are generally 4 steps involved in making code contributions. The first step, documentation. Before starting on code, follow good programming practices and make sure the issue is documented. Every project uses an issue tracker, and they often have a list of issues already identified. For DNN, you can find ours at dnntracker.atlassian.net. If you found a new bug that you want to work on, then create a new bug report in the issue tracker. Remember to be thorough. This bug report will be used by others to verify the bug and to ensure that the fix you submit actually resolves the issue. This may also be used to identify areas where the project documentation needs to be updated. The more thorough your documentation, the more likely it is that your fix will be accepted. For the DNN team, we like reports to include a short description of the problem, the steps needed to reliably reproduce the problem, the behavior you expected to see, and the actual behavior of the software. Finally, include screenshots whenever possible. Often these screenshots can clarify the problem and aid in the team's understanding of the issue. Let's go ahead and see this process in action. You can see here that I'm already logged in to the issue tracker at dnntracker.atlassian.net, and I've got a list of issues here for the DNN platform. There's one that I've been looking at, this DNN 5361. Let's go ahead and open that up and take a look. So as you can see here, we've got a nice description that shows us the issue, tells us the steps to reproduce the issue, gives us the actual and expected results. So this is a nice, concise write-up. The other thing that I like is that it gives us a nice screenshot so I can see exactly what the issue is. Here we can see that effectively we've got a upload button that is always active, and I need to make sure it's disabled until we actually have chosen a file to upload. So this is a nice, easy issue that I can go ahead and fix. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and assign the issue to myself. Since I'm already logged in, it's going to go ahead and assign it to me. And now I don't have to worry about anyone else taking this issue while I'm off working, researching how to actually fix the issue. If there wasn't an issue already created, one that I liked, I could actually go in and create a new issue. Maybe there was something that I found during my normal usage, and I could go ahead and create this new issue, enter all the summary information, a nice description with the full documentation as we talked about before, and I would go ahead and create that, and again then just assign that to myself. But for now, we're going to go ahead and use this one on the configuration manager and go ahead and go fix this. The next step, you'll want to get the source code. Now that you've picked an issue to work on and it is fully documented, it is time to get the latest copy of the source code. You will probably want the source code locally so you can edit. You'll need to get a version control tool that works with the repository used by the project you're working on. There are many different types of version control systems available. Many developers are used to working with client-server type version control. These systems generally have a single central repository. All of the developers check out code, make changes, and check in the changed code. Often, files are locked while code is being changed to minimize conflict between multiple developers. Many open source projects have moved to distributed version control systems, which work on a peer-to-peer model. These systems focus on simplifying the process of merging code and dealing with code conflicts. The end result is nobody is blocked waiting for someone else to finish editing a file so that it can be unlocked. Many of the most popular version control systems are also available as SaaS solutions. SourceForge, CodePlex, and GitHub are but a few of the most popular options. DNN has used each of these services at one point or another over the last 10 years. Currently, DNN uses GitHub for our source control repository. Now that we know what version control system we're using, how do I get the source code from GitHub to my local machine? Let's look at a high-level overview of the steps, and then I'll go ahead and demonstrate it. The primary DNN repository is located on GitHub's server in the cloud at github.com/dnnsoftware/dnn.platform. As a new user, you won't have permissions to make changes to this repository. Instead, what you want to do is fork the project. This creates a copy of the project, including all of the branches and code changes throughout the history of the project. However, this new fork is created in your own account, so you have full permission to make whatever changes you want in your repo. Once you have a fork in your account, you can go ahead and clone the project to your local machine. This is essentially the same thing as a fork. You are creating a full replica of the project locally so that you can make edits. Now that you understand the process, let's go ahead and see it in action. Here I'm logged into GitHub and I have the DNN Software, DNN Platform project open. And the first step we want to do that we talked about was forking the project to my local account. So here I have my Jay Brinkman account on GitHub. As you can see, I also have a DNN Software account, which is the one I'm currently on right now. And so what this is going to do is going to go ahead and fork that code and make a copy of it over to my repository. And here we go. So now I have a copy of my own. I can make whatever edits I want to this copy without impacting the original DNN Software version, which is effectively the master version, if you will. So now that I have my own copy of DNN Platform, let's go ahead and clone it down to my desktop. To do that, I'm going to need some software, some Git software specifically, to be able to deal with the clone process. I can go ahead and download this software. I'm going to use one called GitHub for Windows. You can get that at windows.github.com. There are many other great tools. You can use the command line Git tools that are available. There's also another one that I use quite frequently called SourceTree from Atlassian. For the simple stuff that we're going to show here, I'm just going to go ahead and use the GitHub for Windows. One of the nice features is that they actually have this button, Clone and Desktop. And if you don't have GitHub for Windows installed, it'll actually figure that out and go ahead and download and install that for you. This would take just a couple seconds for this to come up. We'll go ahead and let this process finish here. And now you can see it's gone ahead and opened up the GitHub for Windows. Let's go ahead and click this clone again so it'll actually now be able to use that protocol. You'll see we've got GitHub for Windows opens up and it asks me where do I want to put this software. My personal preference when I'm doing stuff, I have a data drive where I keep my websites, so we're going to put it here in my data drive in the development directory. And it's going to go ahead and clone that from GitHub down to my local machine. This is going to take a few minutes, so we'll go ahead and take a break and come back when this is done. And it looks like we are just about done pulling down a copy of the code. and it's going to go ahead and check out files. Effectively, this means it's going to get a particular branch of the code. One of the nice things about GitHub for Windows is that it automatically defaults me to the primary branch that's identified in the GitHub account. In the case of DNN Software and DNN Platform, this is our development branch, which is where we want all external check-ins to come into that branch. Okay, now that we have our repository down locally, we can see the history. We can also see, notice here, that I'm in the development branch. I could choose, we've got all these other branches, but by default it put me in the development branch, which is right where I want to be. Step 3. Now that we have the code locally, we can go ahead and start working on our fix. Before editing code, it is important to remember to make sure we're working in the right code branch. Since we have the code locally, and DNN is a .NET application, we'll go ahead and open the project in Visual Studio and make our changes. Before we begin editing code, we need to set up a local environment so we can run .NET Nuke and see the changes and the fixes that we're putting in place and make sure everything's working correctly. So to do that, let's go ahead and create a new blank database. It doesn't matter what the name is, so I'm just going to call it DNN Platform just to keep things consistent. We'll go ahead and save that. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and create the application in IIS. So we're going to create this as a new application under the default website. And the reason we're doing this here is that this is the way Visual Studio Solution for DNN expects it. So it expects this name in localhost, so we'll go ahead and do that to make things easy on ourselves. And then we'll go ahead and point the application at our development environment where we downloaded DNN earlier, and there's our website directory. And so everything looks good. We're using the default app pool here. And the reason I do that is that I've set up my default app pool on my system to use the network service identity. And I do that so that in SQL Server I can actually have one identity that I use for all of my DNN accounts. I primarily do DNN development on this box, so having one account that I use across all the various DNN installations is not really a big issue. I would never do this in production. I would actually use a much more secure accounts that are isolated from each other in the various app pools. But for my local machine, this seems to work pretty well and has worked for me for many years. So that's what we're going to do today. So now I've got my application set up in IIS and I've got my blank database. So let's go ahead and go into Visual Studio. I can go ahead and open the solution file. So this is the solution that we downloaded earlier when we cloned our GitHub account. And that opens up pretty quickly, and you'll notice that there's quite a bit of code here. So if you're not familiar with the project, definitely you'll need to spend some time in the code familiarizing yourself. One thing to note as you look through the code is that there are some files that don't seem to be here in the source, in the default source code. One of those is the web config file. And the reason for that is there are a number of files that can be generated during the build process depending on a couple of different factors, and depending on whether or not we really need to keep a version controlled version of that artifact. In this case, we have a release config and we have development config, which are really just web config files that are set up for two different environments. And we use the build, the MS build that's part of Visual Studio project files, and we use that to configure and set up the system whenever we do a build process. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do a debug build really quick. That's going to generate all my PDBs and all my DLLs that I need initially. And it's also going to copy the development config down and rename it to web config. Had I done a release build with no web config available, then it would have used that release.config. So when this finishes up, I'll have a web config file, and I'll have a bunch of PDBs and DLLs in my bin directory. There we go. Everything looks good. And so now if I come over here and I do a quick refresh, what I'm going to see is now I've got my web config. Okay, and that looks fine. So let's go ahead, and there's one other step we need to do here, because in the default DNN install or the default DNN source tree, we don't keep compiled modules or extensions in the DNN source tree. We build those at build time as part of our build process, and then they can be installed. So all of the sources here to build the modules and the authentication systems and JavaScript libraries and the such, and if we go into the release mode and go ahead and do a release build, it will go ahead and create all of those project artifacts for us in the appropriate location. So the process is basically do a debug build, do a release build, and that'll put all the files in the proper locations and get you ready for the local install. If you're not doing source code editing, you know, all of these steps, you don't really need to go through them, but for local developers, we feel it's not too onerous to do a couple of extra build steps up front, and it keeps our source tree nice and clean. So now I should have everything. If I go and do a file refresh here again, you'll see now I've got all these zip files, and these are the files that are going to get installed. These are the extensions that are going to get installed when I do my DNN install. So now that we've got everything built, the next step is we need to go into web config. Because of the way I've got my local system configured, I'm going to go ahead and just short circuit a step here, and I'm just going to edit the database name here directly in my web config. I actually have an issue on my machine where it doesn't seem to pick up the database correctly, so I know that I can just edit this connection string and we'll solve that problem pretty easily. Normally you wouldn't have to do this step, but I've got some other issue going on my machine, so we'll just take the easy way here since I know what the solution is. And we'll copy this down. And this second connection string is really just a piece of legacy code. There are a number of other modules that are looking at the old app settings. This dates all the way back to some of the original DNN1 code base, and so for some of the modules out there, they still expect the connection string to be in this location, so we leave it there for now. It doesn't really hurt anything and sort of helps us. So now that we have everything edited here, I've got my web config where I need it. I've got all my modules and everything in the install folders. So let's go ahead and view this in the browser. And what's going to happen is we're going to launch DNN, and it's going to detect that there's no database. Now normally I wouldn't need to edit the web config and it would detect that SQL Express didn't have a database connection, but on my machine it's a little bit different. So anyway, it drops us into the install wizard, and I can go ahead and just enter my passwords here, and I'm going to look at the database information to make sure it's correct. Now, one of the things about being in a debug, that development configuration, is that it defaults to having an object qualifier, and this just helps to ensure that when you're editing scripts and stuff, the SQL Server scripts, that you're using the object qualifier tag appropriately. I don't need that for the fix that I'm doing today, and I prefer not to have that in my systems. I've been doing this a while, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it out. But if you're relatively new to the project, I recommend just leave that in. It's not going to hurt you, and it'll help lead you into some good practices down the road as you're editing your SQL scripts. So now this is going to go ahead and install, and this is going to take about a minute, minute and a half. So I'm just going to pause the video here and we'll come back when the installation is completed. Okay, that took a little less than a minute to complete, and now we can go ahead and view our website. Okay, we're now on the website and we're ready to log in, or we're logged in and we're ready to take a look at the problem. So if we go into the host area and we go into the configuration manager, what we see is on this merge scripts page, if I just click upload here, I'm going to get an error basically telling me that I didn't have a file selected. What I want to do is trap that and not allow this upload button to be clicked until I've actually chosen a file. So let's go back into my source code. Let that reload web config. And what I want to do is go into, I know where this file is. This is in desktop modules. It's in the admin section. And it's actually inside an XML merge module. And this just happens to be some old legacy naming here, but that doesn't matter for our purposes. And so what I want to do is I want to go into the JavaScript, and I want to add, so we can see here we're doing some localization with that file upload control here, and I just want to add a little bit of code to make this so that we can disable that JavaScript button if it's not got a file upload control. So let's go ahead and do that. I've got some code here available, and effectively all I'm going to do is just set a disabled attribute on that and then watch the file upload change event, and if I have a value in there, then I'm going to go ahead and re-enable that button and remove that disabled class. So fairly straightforward code. I may want to add a little comment here as well, just so anyone coming along behind me knows why we're making this change. So now I've got this commented and it's saved, and let's go back and check the behavior to make sure that we have the behavior that we expect. So to do that, let me reload this page. And so now I should have noticed that I can't hover, I can't click on this, nothing happens if I do. If I choose a file, let's go in and choose maybe in my DNN install, I know I've got an XML merge script that I can go ahead and test with, and websites and install config, we've got this net40. And then if I go ahead and click upload, now I'm going to actually upload that configuration file. And this behaves exactly the way I would expect. And again, I don't have anything chosen here, and my upload button is disabled again. So everything is working exactly the way I want it to, and I'm ready to go ahead and save that change and go ahead and start pushing that back up to the server.
The final step in the process is to push the code back up to our repository in the cloud and submit a pull request. Throughout the process, it is important to make sure that we are still in the correct branch of the project. There are 3 steps to get our code submitted. First, we need to commit our code to the local repository. Then we'll push our code to a private repository on GitHub. Finally, we can perform a pull request, which will tell the DNN team that we have a change that we would like them to apply to the master repository. Let's go ahead and take a look at these using GitHub and GitHub for Windows.
After our recent code changes, when we go back into GitHub for Windows, we can see that we have an uncommitted set of changes that we need to push back to the local repository. So let's go ahead and do that. We've got we want to name this in a particular way, so I'm going to use the issue from the issue tracker number, and then just a short description. And I do that so that the GitHub will actually talk to Atlassian and basically tell Jira that this issue is associated with this code change, and the two systems actually work fairly well together. So by making that change, it allows it to tie those two together, and really it's based off of this key right here. So I'm going to go ahead and then just commit that file, and since it's a fairly simple commit, I'll go ahead and do that. And that's pushing that up. And effectively what that did was that pushed that to my local repository. Before then, I just had these code changes. They were on my file system, but they weren't in any source code repository. So effectively, if you've been doing source code revision control for a while, that's kind of what you might have known as a check-in, right? But all I did was check in locally. Now what I need to do is I need to take my local change and push it back up to my repository in GitHub. And normally this is a two-step process in most tools. GitHub for Windows actually makes this a little simpler, and they call it sync. But a sync is really pull down any changes that I don't have from that remote repository, pull them down to my local system, and that forces you to do any merge conflicts with any changes that someone else might have checked in. And then it's going to do a push of all of my new changes from my local system back up to the remote repository. And you can see here that I really just have that one change to push up. I don't have anything coming down. And that's as you would expect, because I own that remote repository, the Jay Brinkman /DNM platform. That's my repository. I'm the only one with access to it. So I really don't have any merge conflicts there. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a sync, and that's effectively doing a push up to my remote GitHub repository. So now our changes are up in our remote repository, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. We'll just go ahead and do a quick refresh here. And we can see that my latest commit is now in my repository up on GitHub. Now what I need to do is I want to go ahead and submit a pull request from my repository into the DNN software repository. And this basically tells the maintainers of the DNN platform that I have a change I would like them to review, and here's the code fix, or here's all of the file changes that go with that. So we'll just go ahead and press this little pull request button, and that'll take us, show me exactly what the changes are that we want to make, and then I can just go ahead and click this create pull request. One thing to note is that throughout this process I was working in the development branch. You can do different branching strategies locally to work on different fixes. I kept it nice and simple so that you don't really have a lot of issues with Git using this model. But certainly it can get a lot more complicated than this. The main thing to remember is that you always want to be pushing back into this development branch. And if you start from a local copy that's in development or that's branched off of development, then it's going to make this pull request really easy for the DNN project team to review. At the end of the day, the thing that you want to remember, make it easy on everybody. Make it easy on the project team. If they've got one file to review and it's a development branch versus development branch, that's a very trivial thing to review and to make sure that it works correctly, and it'll probably get approved if and applied if I go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead and create that pull request. And we'll just include the comment there. We can preview it. We can actually use Markdown if we want, which is fairly nice. We can get as elaborate as we want here. This is a fairly simple bug, so I'm going to keep this simple. And then we'll go ahead and create that pull request. And so now I have this pull request And here it actually transferred me back into DNN software, and because I'm a maintainer on that project, I could actually go ahead and approve this merge or this pull request. I'll go ahead and leave that for the rest of the project team to handle for now. But at this point, we've now done everything from pulling the code down, making the code changes, pushing it all the way back up, and submitting that pull request for the team's review. Congratulations! If you've been following along and have submitted your own pull request, then you have just joined a very elite club. Fewer than 1% of all users of open source software will ever contribute a change back to the project. It is people like you who help make open source work. Where do you go from here? You can continue working on more bug fixes. After you've made a couple and are comfortable with the process, you might try helping with a larger enhancement or a feature request. Maybe you and a few other community members can collaborate as part of a small team on a larger feature. Also, open source projects need more help than just making code changes. Consider helping out on the documentation in the wiki, or answering questions in the forums and QA areas. Maybe you have a great idea for a new skin or a module that you could make. Finally, take your experience and blog about it. Who knows? Maybe you'll write the next great blog or video about how to contribute to open source.